Hello, 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 a very warm welcome to all our friends, viewers, stakeholders, fans of Africa Rise with Susan West. It's a brilliant Thursday today. It's bright and beautiful here in London, and I do hope that wherever you are joining the stream from, that it is a wonderful weather you're having. I'm having fun today. I have got my brother Starman waiting in the wings, and without taking too much of your time, I'm going to bring in Starman on screen. We're going to be talking Pan Africanism, the BRICS, and more. Okay, so as usual, send in your questions and comments as you may have them, and your contributions in general. Share this broadcast and like, follow, subscribe to all our channels. It's Africa Rice TV on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. All right, let's get Starman on. Starman
Oh,
Alpha, my favorite guy on Africa Rise.
hi, Suzanne, my
Starman, how's
favorite
your day been?
host. Huh?
How's your day been?
So.
It's very warm
Yeah.
outside.
Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
a rainy few days, and then suddenly it just turned like,
Yeah, the
and
rain a couple of days ago was scary. It was like non-stop and crazy, isn't it? But we liked it because the weather was quite hot
yeah.
and it managed to cool it down a bit. Yes, so Starman, what have you got for us today?
Um, well, I mean, there's always something to talk about as long as we're still in this situation as Africans, as Black people. Um, I mean, staying to the title, I mean, kind of like on a general scope, I guess, Pan Africanism and all this talk about BRICS. Yeah.
Hey, Sandra Metico Bordering, my sister. How are you? All the way from the United States of America. Thank you, Sandra. Oh, yes. Like we're still in this situation, isn't it? So we can't stop talking about it. I was trying to have a bit of fun today. So I do hope that my blue lipstick is not doing very badly. Yeah, I'm a little vain. So allow me digress a little bit. Okay, Starman, let's go ahead. What is it about, like especially the last meeting they had in France, the African leaders with,
Mm.
the BRIC nations, the African countries who, well, not very much. I don't remember any other African countries other than South Africa. Please, you know, help remind me if there's anyone I've left out.
South
Um,
Africa is the major player. Um, Egypt is being steadily roped in. There are some projects where they are beginning to center Egypt. Nigeria. There was some noise about Nigeria joining, but then I read something about Nigeria not meeting the standard.
are you kidding me?
How many billion dollars in debt are we?
Oh,
Do we
so
even?
that's a
BRICS is
criteria.
talking about. Sorry,
So that's a criteria.
BRICS is talking about a new currency backed by gold and a basket of 20 other commodities. Nigeria, they just discovered gold in the Middle Belt, right? I've been asking this question since before the election that the gold they found in Nigeria's Middle Belt, that's apparently supposed to be able to rival South Africa's gold. Eh?
Mhm.
What's happening to it? As the dollar, the whole world is now de-dollarizing, and everybody is talking about commodity-backed currencies. All the central banks around the world are scrambling around looking for gold, stashing gold. Does the CBN have any gold reserve? No, no, seriously, people should ask themselves that question. Does Central Bank of Nigeria have any gold reserve? Because if the dollar goes down, since the naira is pegged to it, uh, since the naira is pegged to it, the naira is going to go down as well, and even worse, because the inflation of the naira is worse than the inflation of the dollar.
Hmm.
And I just even heard apparently all you need to give someone these days is £1,000, and you've made them a millionaire in naira.
That's right. That's right. Because as of today, The money exchange, I'm not sure if there is a black market rate or if it's just, an official rate, but I got information is 1,000 naira to a
A
pound.
1,008. I heard 1,008 naira.
1,008?
Yeah.
Like 1,008 naira,
Eight.
not
Yeah. 1,008
1,800.
naira. Yeah.
Right.
So that's all you need to send someone £1,000, and in Nigeria, you've made them a millionaire.
That's
Even
a
if
lot
you
of money
just
even
notice
here, a
their
thousand
test time.
pounds.
They say? You say?
That £1,000 is a lot of money even here in the UK.
Yeah. 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 But come on, let's think back to Jonathan's time. We're told you needed to send about £6,000 to make them a millionaire.
That's right.
You
Yes. So Nigeria didn't make the court. Didn't make the court. But
Nah.
what other African nations have
Uh, I mean,
shown
I know a lot of them are
interest?
clamoring. I mean, maybe one will talk more. I'll talk about the advantages of the BRICS, why people are, or countries around the world, because if you look at the current geopolitics, it's like the world is splintering into two. I mean, they keep talking about East versus West, but realistically, it's G7 versus
Versus
BRICS. Now, there's a third force in there. It's just that nobody ever bothers to mention this force, and that's the global South, the Africans, Papua New Guinea. Yeah, we're the black people. No one
mm,
gives a shit. But anyway, maybe as we talk, I'll talk about if only the third force could recognize their power and
our.
wake up. Oh, if only.
Hmm.
Anyway, yeah.
In my opinion, I think that they understand the power they have. However, the people at the in at positions of to negotiate are the people who already are stained and have no interest whatsoever of the countries they lead, but for themselves. And when you have too much debts to hide, they use this as a bargaining chip.
Yeah,
Make sure that they get what they want. Because I think all the African nations and leaders are thoroughly aware of the fact that they have an edge right now because they
yeah,
seem to be the woman everybody wants, the hottest cake in town.
yeah.
Of course, with a lot of value. However, um, it's not as though they're unaware of the power they wield right now. Is the fact that, take for instance, someone like Tinubu of Nigeria.
Hmm,
What can he actually negotiate to favor the country? If he does put his foot down on certain issues, then the American government, who are turning a blind eye right now as to the dirts, the certification, the indictment, or whatever it is about the stories we hear
hmm,
about, his connection with narcotics in the United States of America. These are things they're just going to say, okay, they're just going to, put in front of his face. Like, it's either this or this. So, can you imagine all the African nations who have leaders that have such dirt on them?
hmm.
They know what to do. They can't do it because their hands are tied.
Okay, we'll get to African leaders at some point. We can't talk about this without talking about them even. But I'll say why I said that third force. If only they could recognize this power and wake up. Now, first things first is that in this struggle for new supremacy between so-called East and West, or G7, the old power, versus BRICS, the new rising power, the reality is for the old power, the G7, to hold on to the power they have, and for the rising power, the BRICS, to take that power, they need to control Africa, that third force. They need to,
Yeah.
so so this is why I said the Africans, if only they recognize. Now, in the position we're in today, and as you described, our leaders, they are being used, you know, and that, Now, the way I see this is, so there was an old power, the G7, and then a new power came on the block. But even the BRICS ultimately will not be the last power, because I think eventually the African nations, not all of them, but some of them, which I guess maybe when we talk about Pan Africanism, some of them will rise and form their own economic bloc. But some fundamental things need to change on the African continent first. Because as the African continent is constituted today, most of our leaders, and I don't like calling them leaders, I prefer to call them prison warders. Most of them are working for the West. They are controlling the prisons built by the West. Now, like I said in one of the last programs we had, that, where we as Black people are actually prisoners of war. In a war, when one group conquers another group, they kill off the army of the other group, meaning they've killed off most of the strong men. Then the survivors, who they will now imprison, turn into prisoners of war, they eventually pick leaders amongst them. And they're going to pick the leaders that have trauma bonded the most, those that are willing to do the bidding, do the calling, or anything the people that won the war say. They're not going to pick rebellious types like me. In fact, the remaining rebellious types they will kill off. You know, so all our leaders today are those ones that have trauma bonded on whatever level, whether they because remember, a lot of our leaders today are the sons of the first presidents, whether they were traumatized during colonial, their fathers were traumatized during colonialism and they grew up under this trauma, maybe because people like Kenyatta, remember, he was a civil servant for the British. They arrested him. By the time he came out of prison, he was the best friends of the British governor of Kenya, you know, and they turned a blind eye to him and his family looting the country as long as they maintained certain interests in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder why people like Nnamdi Kanu were arrested in Kenya. Kenya is still a neo-colony, like Nigeria is. So the problem is that our leaders they're all working for the West or have been. And the West now, the West, they're not, I mean, come on, these are masters of manipulation. So just because they see you've trauma bonded doesn't mean they're still not going to have a leverage over you. So what they do is they sucker our leaders. Right, yeah. Loot all you want, but just make sure we have access to the resources, as much resources as we want. And then after our leaders do all the looting, the West now goes to them, hey guys, you know what? You know that money you've looted, your share of the loot, yeah? Bring it to London. Bring it to our tax havens, all those Panama papers and all that bullshit. Bring it there. We'll look after it for you. Because remember, if your people uprise and they chase you away and your money is in your country, you've lost it all.
That's right.
So our leaders fall for this bullshit, move all their money there in form of raw cash, resources, and even when they invest in property and all that bullshit. Yeah. Well, sorry. When they invest in our leaders move all that money there, which is just what the West wants. Because once that money is now there, that's the leverage they need. The West needs over our leaders, our so-called leaders. Because the minute the minute any of them says, okay, I'm not doing what you want to give, what they do first is not seize all their assets abroad.
Yeah.
And then these leaders, when they seize your assets abroad, you now find yourself between a rock and a hard place. You've lost everything abroad, and then in your country, you've got little or nothing, and the people don't like you anyway.
Stanley,
So
can you reframe, please, properly?
oh, sorry, yeah. So, this is how they lean on our leaders and manipulate them. Now, our leaders being corrupt, you know, the corrupt ones amongst us, like the real, yes, there's different types of corruption. There's elite state corruption, there's petty street corruption, so, and they are not the same thing. And it's the elite that set the example for the streets. Okay. So, now our leaders today are recognizing, okay, China is giving us another option, especially these days, the West is even controlling us more and more by refusing us loans, more
Mm.
money to loot. So, this thing China is saying, this is why all of them are scrambling around, because when I'll start taking them seriously is when they start addressing the real fundamental problems. Now I know there's also the policy of the West to keep all these countries deindustrialized, and that's a big part of the problem.
Biggest.
Yes, you know. So, but with no resistance from so-called leaders, you're going to remain deindustrialized. The only time will tell if when many of them shift to BRICS, it's not just for them. Oh, okay, a new avenue of getting more money to loot, because this is what we know them by. I'm not under the illusion that say Nigeria joins BRICS tomorrow, any money Tinubu gets from any investment from he's gonna now start building Nigeria. Like, I'm not under that illusion.
Mm. Let me take a quick read from Facebook and YouTube. There's Sao, I'm not sure I'm saying his name right, Sao Dinox Dino. He says, I love that, but Africa's, I think he means Africa first needs nuclear weapons. Then yeah, Charles Odune, you're welcome. Obi Man, yeah, Obi Man, my guy, it's been a long time. Thank you for joining. So, greetings, Africa Rising guest. So, basically, I tell you what, when Saul talks about nuclear weapons, they will never respect Africa as a continent, mm, or any countries on the continent of Africa until we have some sort of deterrent. In this case, you can see the reason why what's going on in Russia is taking so long, whether or not NATO countries would have had more, technology and weapons to have just ended this in a day. Why? Because Russia still remains a powerful nuclear nation, isn't it? Look at
Mm,
countries like Pakistan and India, the sort of respect they give to them, regardless of whether their politics, their democracy, or their economy is good, they still wield some level of power and influence, isn't it?
yeah.
So, if two things, African nations are not allowed to industrialize because we have the raw materials, and if we have the power and the technology to be able to, transform. What's the word now? Process these raw materials into whatever final product it will be, then what again is the leverage that countries in the West or even Asia, like China, will have over Africa or African nations. Okay. So other than economic power, yes, nuclear power is one thing that makes some of these countries look like they're untouchable.
Okay. I'm going to talk about nuclear weapons and industrialization, but before I do, let me even elaborate a bit more on BRICS. Now, BRICS ideally should be a good thing for African countries. The only problem is I don't trust the leadership taking us into it. That's the only problem. Because the leadership doesn't look like and has never looked like they're concerned about tackling even if not fundamental issues, but basic issues. Now, like I said, BRICS, the G7 is dying and BRICS is coming to form. But I still think eventually a new economic bloc will rise, and that will come from tropical Africa when we begin to get our act together. I think BRICS presents Africans a unique opportunity in time and history today, hmm, to finish a struggle our ancestors have been struggling with this generation, with this current generation. We cannot leave this struggle to the next generation. They will not survive it. They are going to be up against AI and robots. This is not this is not conspiracy here. They are not going to survive it. We need to finish this struggle with this current generation because uh uh okay, so with the BRICS, the opportunity it presents is that if BRICS gathers momentum for the first time in about 70, 80 years, the world will finally be free of the big bully on the block, the Americans. And her, every bully has a gang of minions, and with the Western Europeans, well, we'll be free of them because they will no longer be able to threaten anybody with sanctions. Remember, BRICS is going to have their own trading basket of commodities as currencies, or basket of commodities. The West, their own economic financial system is about to collapse. And whatever they come up with, nobody's going to trust it because they're not talking about backing anything, which they can't talk about. Because at this stage, with the size, with how bloated the Western economy has become, there's not enough gold on the planet to back the size it has bloated into.
Hmm.
So there will for a period of time there might be in the future, but with the collapse of the dollar, there will no longer be a global reserve currency, and the world does not need a global reserve currency. There is no law of nature that says the world must have a global reserve currency. But this weak collapse, oh well, let me not say collapse. They will say yeah. This decline of the dollar will lead to America not being able to sanction other nations anymore. And this sanction, and by virtue of the instrument that's used to sanction nations, the dollar and sanctions is the most devastating and dangerous weapon the West has. People don't understand what a sanction is in the 21st. You've heard of a medieval siege. Like when, say, the Mongols ride up to your king's castle back in the day, in the 12th century. They knock on the gates. Maybe your king sees this horseman riding towards his castle, says, pull up the gates. So they pull up, lock
Yeah.
the gates of the castle. The Mongols knock on the gates. Right. We want 10, 10 tons of gold tribute. If you want us to leave you alone, we want 10 tons of gold, 10,000 slaves, and 10,000 of your women. And your king thinks, well, sorry guys, I can't give you that. So the Mongols try and break in, but they can't because it's a castle, it's fortified.
Mm-hmm.
So what they now do is they surround the castle, they lay siege to it. And the aim of the siege is to starve out the castle by cutting in supplies in and out of the castle.
Yeah.
Basically just cut off the economy of that castle to the outside world. Cut off the economy, which is what
Of
sanctions
course.
is.
Because at some point, there'll be a need to get something, resources, anything from the outside of that.
And because everything today
Mm.
is traded by in the dollar,
Yeah.
once they cut you off from that dollar system and dollar supply, you're under siege. You're effectively under siege. And I've heard it said that sanctions have killed more people than wars,
That's
even.
true.
And this is what the siege in medieval times. By the time your castle is cut off for 3 days, sorry, for 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
people are starving. Sanitation in the city or the castle has dropped. All sorts of disease epidemics spring up. You You destroy the castle from the inside.
Absolutely.
And this is what the West uses the dollar to do. And this is why even our corrupt leaders are seeing, wow, this is a chance for me not to be boxed into a corner anymore. If I can tie myself to a new economic system
Yeah.
where there's no global reserve currency that can sanction me, cut me off, then the sky is the limit.
Starman, you know that the what I can't I'm unable to wrap my head around how they will succeed, even though they are coming together as countries from Asia and Africa, and of course um, Far East Europe, Asia,
Mm,
sorry,
mm.
Asia,
Southeast Asia.
Russia, yeah. So this is something Gaddafi tried to do, and everybody knows it's the reason why he was taken out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm struggling to understand, even though Gaddafi was one person,
Mm,
is countries, nations coming together to try. How is this going to happen? First, on the African. Okay, let me take a read from Facebook. Paul Osita Ojuku says, "How can Africa unite while some Africans, maybe he meant to say, don't identify themselves as Africans." You know why I took that read? Even on the
mm.
African continent, there are countries that don't identify as Africans, or economically, or whether it's ethnically, using the ethnicity, they fail to
Yeah.
identify as Africans.
Yeah.
Okay,
And we'll get to that. But before we do, and please bring me back to it,
yes.
please,
And
in case I
King
forget.
Obi-Man says we only have, thank you for that. I said we only have South Africa in BRICS, and its economy is owned by people who have European interests.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, fine. So I want to start from what you said about Gaddafi.
Hmm.
Now, before Gaddafi, there was Saddam, the first man in modern times that tried to go against the global reserve currency system controlled by the US on behalf of the West. He was talking about selling his oil in euros, and suddenly, Gulf War, boom, 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 destroyed. They hung the guy even. That hanging was significant. It was to set an example. This is what happens to you when you threaten our global reserve
Hmm.
currency. And unfortunately for Saddam, he didn't have nukes. If he really had nukes, those weapons of mass
Yes.
destruction they claim, they wouldn't have gone in like that.
Yes.
They just cooked up that story. Then came Gaddafi. Now, Gaddafi was talking of the gold dinar, which was an even better system than Saddam's. He's talking of commodity with value, not colored paper. People will tell you, "Oh, the dollar is backed by America's military might." What's military might? Especially when the military might will come and bomb me when I don't want to do what they want me to do, even though it's against my own
Hmm.
interest. Military might, my ass, like
Excuse your French. You're swearing a
so.
lot
Yeah,
today.
no, but yeah, some of these things when you think it through, is just that asinine, you know. Anyway, so um, now the gold dinar would have been better for Africans. Not saying that it would have been the best, but it would have been better for us because from the sounds of the gold dinar, it would have still been controlled by North Africa and Gaddafi. So, well, depending on how much leverage we take to the table initially, you know, and remember that gold, that Sahel region of Africa is rich in gold. That's why all of them they are there. They're instigating terrorism there today, looting the gold because they can see the dollar is about to fall and everything is going to revert. See, this dollar is just colored paper. The reason people are talking about gold today is because for gold, dollar is how old is dollar? How old is colored paper money? Even going back to Marco Polo or when the Chinese started it, 1400s, 1300s. 700 years. Gold has been used by humans as currency for 5,000 years. No, what am I even saying as currency? As money for 5,000 years. Is the original money. And that's why when fiat currencies
Hmm.
collapse, everybody runs back to gold. And in the history of humankind, there has been a history of over 2,000 fiat currencies. Even before this current generation of fiat currencies, all of them have collapsed to zero, every single one. So nothing makes the dollar super currency that somehow
Will never be.
it will never. After all, since 1913, when the Fed took control of producing, printing, and distributing the dollar has lost 98% of its value, meaning that in 1913, if it was going to cost you 1 cent, which is a hundredth of a dollar, to buy a kilogram of bread, eh, today it will cost you 98 cents to buy the same kilogram of bread. That's how much the value of the dollar has been inflated away. So it's only 2% left. Of course, it's just amazing. In fact, I'm predicting it. I've been predicting this. Within 5 years, the dollar will be nothing more than a local currency. And with the decline of the
Guess what?
dollar,
But that will be greatly dependent on how the war in Ukraine pans out. The outcome of the war in Ukraine will
mm,
determine the
mm.
longevity
Oh
of
yeah,
the
yeah.
dollar.
The war in Ukraine is part of fighting for the life of the dollar. If they destabilize Russia, they destabilize the major leg of the BRICS. See, oh man, the BRICS. Anyway, up to this even. So back to Gaddafi. That gold dinner system would have been much better for Africans. Now, uh, how this BRICS came about was because after the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was desperately trying to join the Eurozone, desperately trying to join NATO, but they weren't having it
Hmm.
because people don't realize this, but Northern Europe, which is the Germanic peoples, they've been having beef with Slavic people since 1000s. This is some age-old beef. Pe- Join the dots together, then you understand why the Slavic people were targeted for slavery by the Germanic ones. That the word slave, the etymology of it is from the ethnic group Slav that was targeted. So since the 1000s, they've hated these people. Even when the Slavic people adopted Christianity, because back then they used to call them pagans. The
Hmm.
Germanic people had adopted Christianity under the Holy Roman Empire. How those Slavic people were targeted for slavery is just how they targeted tropical African people for slavery too. They called them pagans, they called us pagans. The some deep racism, same thing against black people. Since the 1500s, Northern Europe has tried to invade Russia over 20 times since the 1500s alone. For one reason or another, one even that they were bringing them their own version of Christianity, even after these people they used to call pagans had adopted their own Orthodox Christianity.
Hmm.
Britain, the great game that they played with Russia, they called it the great game. 100 years of cat and mouse watching each other. Britain was paranoid that Russia wanted to steal India from them. So because of that, they went into Afghanistan. And then Russia instigated the Afghanistans to turn on the British. And the Afghanistan, those guys, they are hard fighters. They gave British Army one of their greatest, worst defeats ever. But some of the worst defeats Britain ever experienced were in Africa, though. But that's another story from that time.
Okay.
Those Zulu, Ndi Ekumeku, the Igbos. Anyways, and that
Just
story.
before we carry on, I'm so excited to see someone here. Sinovia Indigo. Peace and love. So good to see you, my beautiful family. She says, Sinovia, we missed you. I know, I just knew that you guys are going to come back. These are our, staunch family here on Africa Rise TV. And because we went off broadcasting for a long time, a lot of them didn't even know we're back.
I remember
Slowly
Sinovia.
everyone is coming back. So happy to see you, Sinovia. Thank you so much for joining the stream and sharing. Yes. Okay. Starman Alpha, do not lose your line of thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So it's,
so
yeah,
uh, okay,
carry on.
so this beef with Russia is deep. And so after Britain and the Great Game, when they were paranoid that Russia was trying to take India from them, then came Napoleon. Napoleon went all the way east that he was going to invade Russia. After Napoleon, and this is now recent history, there was Germany, Hitler, that is going to invade Russia as well, that is looking for Lebensraum, living space, you know. So for the Russians are looking at these people thinking, what did we do to you guys, man? Like, you know, and the reason why they are targeting Russia now, like I said, Russia tried to join NATO, tried to join the EU. They didn't want it. And it was because of the Americans. The Americans, who are also, remember, Anglo Saxons, they are Germanic peoples, they are Northern Europeans. And these Germanic people, they are the most genocidal group in human history, the most bloodthirsty. They've conquered the most, killed the most. They've ended up stealing two continents, North America and Australia. The Southern Europeans stole one continent, South America, you know. So the Americans knew that if Russia was integrated into Europe, it would be the beginning of the end of American hegemony and NATO would disintegrate because NATO was set up to check the Soviet Union in the first place. They didn't want this because the neoliberals had taken power, and the neoliberals, yeah, this, you know, Americans are drunk on American exceptionalism and believe, everybody must follow the American way because American way is the best. And they were now after world domination, meaning controlling everybody's resources as well. And they didn't want to lose that power they had with NATO and controlling the European Union. So something significant happened. Russia, China, after China was rising from their rapid industrialization, Russia and China, when they didn't want to let Russia join the EU, China, and Germany started this new talks. They were talking about creating a new bloc, a new economic bloc, the Eurasia bloc.
Russia,
And
Germany, and China.
yeah, Russia, Germany, and China,
China.
Eurasia bloc. And this would have pretty much done what the Americans were scared of, taking power away from them. Because China has a massive industrial base. And if you know anything about capitalism,
Yes.
industry is the capital, is the money, is the wealth, is the money wealth creator, the industry. Not the resources even. You can have aluminium ore, fill your whole house. As aluminium ore, it doesn't mean anything. But if you have the industry to turn that aluminium ore to aluminium sheets, aluminium rods, aluminium this, aluminium plates, aluminium whatever, then that's value. You've added value. You know, so it was going to be China with the industrial base, Russia with the resources, because Russia is arguably the second most resource rich country on the planet after Congo. Some people argue it's the other way around, but hey ho, you know. And then Germany with all the technical expertise. Germany is like a engineering. Uh, those guys, they know their engineering. Engineering is a deep cultural thing for those guys. Um, So these three countries with these three skill sets would have created probably the most powerful economic bloc ever. So the Americans needed to break that, which was why it has all led to all these issues going on in Ukraine now. Now, especially with the breaking of that Nord Stream pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
Europe and Russia is going to take decades before they make up again. So now Europe can no longer get cheap resources from Russia, which accelerated Russia and China bringing together this new alliance of the BRICS and is now clearly dividing the world between East, West, and again, like all of them, all their analysts on TV, YouTube, always forget to mention the South. Even though, yeah, they're both fighting.
Global South.
Yeah. So I say all that to say this finally. The BRICS, for the first time, has actually overtaken the G7 in terms of population and global GDP. And also, bearing in mind that China has the main industrial base on the planet,
Mm-hmm.
if you ask me, it's over for the G7. It's over. Plus, the fact that with all that industrial base, China produces more engineers alone per year than all the undergraduates per year the UK produces. Not just engineers, no. China produces more engineers alone, and just engineers, than all the undergraduates the UK produces per year. A 100,000 people, just because they're from the West, cannot outthink a million people just because they're from China. Anyone
Absolutely.
that believes that is harboring racist ideologies,
I
you know.
think that's a mindset that has already been dealt with, especially for Africans. You know, in
Yeah,
those not so long ago, in the past, the Africans were easily intimidated once they saw someone from the West. They just assumed that this person was smarter, more
yeah,
intelligent, more sophisticated, and that's something that has been demystified,
yeah,
just unraveled. Because if you put any African, even from the continent, who's never been abroad, give them the same opportunity, expose them to the same information, and then you realize how sophisticated the African is. So
yeah,
that's absolutely something that has been um, demystified. You
yeah.
know, so
So
you see nowadays you see on global platforms Africans are having conversations with Western people from the West, and they are not timid like they used to be. You know,
you need to listen to some of my conversations with them on Clubhouse.
I know your clubhouse. Yeah, I always miss that. So much going on.
I,
Yes, so
I,
carrying on.
I don't take the nonsense or the gaslighting. No, seriously, I, they know me. They don't know. They don't mess with. They don't mess with anyway. But yeah, um, I everything I was saying before. Yeah, I was saying all that to say that there's actually a graph going around that shows the trajectory of the BRICS nations, their global GDP share, and the G7 nations, their global GDP share. So in 1980, the BRICS nations had just 10% of global GDP. The G7 had 56% in 1980. By 2017, the BRICS nations had 16%. 2017, 16%. And the G7 had dropped to 36%. Today, this year, 2023, that graph has, for the first time, crossed. So today, the G7 has, I think, 30% of global GDP, and the BRICS nations have approximately 32% of global GDP.
Hmm.
So the
It's
BRICS nations are overtaking.
almost at par.
Yep.
But you know the interesting
It's not,
thing is,
yes, at par, but
mhm,
the G7 is trending downwards, and the BRICS nation is trending upwards.
yes, yes. You know what's interesting for me is I'm not sure if you're fully aware of what the eligibility criteria is to joining the BRIC nations, to joining the BRICS. Okay,
Mm,
for especially for African countries.
mm,
Now, I just want to paint a scenario where, for instance, of course, Nigeria's economy is very bastardized, much more bastardized to the point where I am even suspicious as to why um, W is it the IMF
yeah.
recently agreed to loan Tinubu's government 500, is it 500 billion or 500 million dollars.
Mm.
I couldn't understand why they were so quick in accepting to give that money to Nigeria, knowing very well the truth of the economy and the
The, I,
potential.
the IMF is an instrument of control of the
Yes,
West.
absolutely.
They,
Now let me say something.
yeah,
What the BRIC nations have set out to achieve, how is it going to be attainable if those eligibility criteria are things that are very difficult for many African nations to be able to meet? And if that happens, if it so happens that a lot of African nations, especially countries like Nigeria, regardless of how messed up things are very, very important countries to have.
mm,
Okay. How is it going to be attainable for the BRICS to succeed if some of these countries on the African continent are left out? Because then the G7 nations will see there is a loophole to come in there and take advantage.
yeah, the thing is, the G7 nations already have most of the African nations in their pocket,
But
and
what we're trying to say is, at a point where they will eventually, that the BRICS will give the G7 a run for their money and eventually even surpass them.
mm,
How will it be a sustainable venture for the BRICS if the eligibility criteria
mm,
remain something that makes it difficult for any other African nations, perhaps other than South Africa or maybe Egypt, if you look at it, or maybe I'm not sure in North Africa which other nations might be able to meet their
mm.
criteria.
Okay, I haven't read their article on the criteria you need to. So I don't know everything by bullet points, but based on what I saw about when they were talking about, someone made a program about Nigeria trying to join, and that Nigeria there was a lot of issues because of the debt and all sorts of different issues like stability. Basically, so I'm sure they have certain criteria you need to meet, but uh, if anything, I don't even think that's going to be a big problem to join in the BRICS because, as far as I know, there's about 40 countries already lining up to join.
I.e.,
Whoa. Saudi Arabia, the most important country lining up to join, because it's because of Saudi Arabia that we have this current system where the dollar is the global reserve currency. When they agreed to that deal with the Americans that all oil must be sold in dollars, and then we started the age of petrodollar. So it's very significant for Saudi Arabia to now be joining an alternative system that to the one that she was a cornerstone to,
mhm.
the G7 petrodollar system. And last month, uh, uh, I think they did their first trade with China, where they sold oil to China, and instead of using dollar, they used they used China's currency, yuan or something like that. So and so then there's Mexico. Mexico, when they announced that they wanted to join, they were thinking of joining BRICS. Next thing, some crazy senator in America was like, "Oh, we need to invade Mexico because of the drug cartels." Like, the Americans they are really not happy because they understand what BRICS represents. And
Yeah.
ultimately for the BRICS nations, they understand that they'll be free of American bullying. America can no longer sanction them.
I'm trying to see if I can find, using Google,
Hmm.
the eligibility criteria for BRIC
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
countries to join the BRICS. And I might not be able to do justice to it whilst here, but basically the BRICS works on the principle of non-interference, equality, and mutual benefit. The alliance is economic, territorial, and resolves political disputes. Three pillars of BRICS are political and security, and economy and financial, cultural, and people to people exchanges. Interesting.
Hmm.
So if um, these are their principles, if
Yeah,
these are
that
the
sounds more like
principles, yeah,
Qatar
the criteria
for
should not
each
be
individual country. Yeah.
it should not be so much based on.
No, the thing with BRICS is that the BRICS they're not trying to tell you, oh, you have to like China is not trying to tell any BRICS nations, oh, you have to now start doing communism. Like how the Americans have their very stringent criteria for you to even be a G7 nation. G7 down is just the West, and then they now, because countries like India were protesting that, come on, you can't, how can you have a country just for you guys and you claim to be the biggest economies controlling policy for everybody. So
Mhm.
they now created G20. And even that G20, there's a certain criteria you need to, even NATO, to join NATO, which is why for Ukraine now, they are relaxing a lot of the criteria just to fast
Mhm.
track NATO's entry into. Uh, but at BRICS, from what I've heard so far, I mean, like I said, I haven't read any articles breaking down point by point by point. Like you need to have certain amount of reserves in maybe gold. If there's one thing I know is that any country trying to join BRICS, how you know how serious they are is follow the news of their central banks. If they are stashing gold, then you know they are serious.
Right. So right now, on the lists, I'm not sure if this is as of May,
Mm.
updated in May. They have countries like Zimbabwe,
Yeah,
Algeria, Argentina, Bahrain, Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates all formally have applied to join the BRICS.
yeah.
Okay. And so basically, on the African continent, we've got Zimbabwe, who has formerly, interestingly, I
Egypt
would
there.
that more other countries like Kenya would have.
Is Egypt in that list?
Pardon me?
The list you read, is Egypt in there?
No, Egypt wasn't listed as of May. Egypt wasn't listed.
Okay.
Yeah, and okay, let's see what's the difference between. Yeah, just carry on with your thoughts. I just wanted to see a little more
Okay.
the difference between the G7 and the BRICS.
So the G7 nations, I don't even know if I can remember all of them, but I know America, Britain, France.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's US, Canada, the UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Japan.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and these are all Western nations, just exclusive club, and they claim to, they dominate all global policy. You know,
Obiman says Ethiopia has applied as of a few days ago.
right?
Okay, interesting. Okay,
So,
so
yeah. I said I was going to talk about Pan Africanism before finally talking about nuclear weapons. So, I think many of us we need to sit down properly and have a proper think about Pan Africanism and what it is and what it should be. Instead of just having this uh, idea with no real foundation, you know, an idea that sounds good.
let me tell you what it. Sorry to cut in, but just
Mm,
to streamline your thoughts a little bit is it almost feels as though Pan Africanism is a thing of the past. We talk about it. There are a few people who are, yeah, still fighting for it from their different countries on the African
mm,
continent, but they are not in positions of leadership that can make any difference.
right.
You know, someone like, what's his name now from South Africa?
Malema.
Pardon me?
Malema.
Julius Malema. Thank you. Okay. So, have we ever given a thought to the fact that there should be alternative ways of achieving a goal or a set out goal if we've tried to do it a particular way and it's just not working? And it's not working because, as much as we would like to um, imagine that every country on the African continent is African, it's not so in reality.
Yeah,
And because the agenda is always so different, it's almost impossible that Pan Africanism is something that will be realized in actuality,
right.
practical in practical terms.
Right.
So
So
if we keep going on about Pan Africanism, it's almost as though nothing is ever going to be achieved until Pan Africanism is achieved.
right. And you see the problem is, a lot of us, when we think of Pan Africanism, we just imagine all the countries on the continent. But it's never going to happen like that. It's never going to happen like that. There's some people on the continent who, in as much as they'll tell you they're Africans, they'll see themselves as Africans, but there are people on another continent who they feel they are more closely related to, who have actually contributed to the destabilization of Africa, you know. And okay, see, the reality is Africa has about, okay, let me see, Africa has about four primary racial groups: Khoisan, Pygmy, and, Niger Congo speakers, Nilo Saharans. Four primary racial groups. Now, over time, these racial groups have broken into subgroups, and Africa still, and this no other continent even has as many racial groups in it. But over time, or even from the beginning of time, each of these groups has located themselves and adapted to a specific unique region of Africa. And if you look at a climatic map of Africa, where it shows you the regions in terms of forest, Sahel, desert, Maghreb, all that. Those regions, before the arrival of Europeans and Arabs, before they came into Africa, into tropical Africa, that's the part, tropical Africa after the Sahara. Those regions of Africa was those different regions formed kind of like natural national boundaries between the different groups. So you had the groups that lived in the Sahel, yeah,
Yeah.
which are largely the Chadic, well, the Nilo-Saharan and the Chadic people. You have the ones that live in the East African highlands, the Kushites. You have the ones that live in the forest, two main racial groups. But okay, so you have the Pygmies, then you have the Niger Congo and Bantu speakers. Then you have the ones that live in the kind of like the Kalahari Desert, which is in the south,
Yeah.
Khoisan. So you have people that adapted to natural geographical climatic zones over millennia, not even centuries. And then Europeans now turned up and started drawing arbitrary lines against the grain of those climatic boundaries. Like Nigeria, they cut from the coast into the forest, into the Sahel, one country. Same thing, Togo, Benin, Ghana, just cutting. So that's why in Nigeria you have Niger Congo speakers in the south, Sahel Chadic speakers in the north. These are two different racial groups with two different worldviews. And it is from understanding this that I understood that there is never going to be one whole Africa map Pan-Africanism. If anything, I envision about 4 or 5 different regions that will each on their own become economic power blocks. So and what will be the common thread of unity in these regions will be culture and I guess genetics.
Yeah. It's going to play a
So
major role.
sorry,
Yeah. It will. Genetics.
and in some regions, religion. So so let me try and break down the regions I see. So I see a a North Africa region. Now, those are not, hey, anthropologists classify them as Eurasians anyway, so they are not, and we know how they feel about us south of them. So they're going to do their own region and probably do some pan Arab thing. Yeah, they're going to do their own economic bloc. Then there's going to be those Africans in the Sahel, the Amazigh uh, people in the and the Chadic people in the Sahel region, stretching all the way to Darfur. Now, them and Northern Sudan might create their own economic bloc. Now, the people on the Horn, that's the region I'm not quite sure of because there's too many divisions there. And why I didn't link the Sahel region to the Horn is because there's the Ethiopian groups in the middle who are similar to the people of the Horn, but different religion, you know. So I think that religion is going to play a part because,
Major.
yeah, it's going to play a part in who allies with who. The you know, and I think the Christians are going to want to delineate from the Muslims, you know, and the Muslims.
That's where nothing tangible is going to be achieved anyway, because on every in every country on the African continent, you have
No,
it's
no,
almost.
no. What I'm saying is delineate. I mean that you know, there's a religious map of Africa where there's a Muslim north and a Christian south.
Mhm.
That boundary where the Muslim north meets the south, there's going to be a lot of delineated countries coming out of there. You know, places like Central African Republic. I imagine the northern small part of it breaking away. They're already campaigning for self-determination. Remember, that's where the Fulani in Central African Republic are. They were the ones that tried to take over the country, and the southern youth rose up, chased them back to the north. And then France came and started supplying. When you hear France and Britain, you just know, okay, evil has started. France came, started supplying the Fulani North weapons. It now almost turned to, in fact, it was a civil war for a while. And then after that, now the Southerners now got the Russians in. Now the Northern Fulani, they say they want their own country now. So you're going to see a lot of that, just like in Nigeria. You know, even the Christian Middle Belt, we are not Northerners anymore. We're going to see a lot of delineation. And it's okay. It's perfectly okay. There's a reason why it's happening and why it has to happen anyways. So, like I said, there'll be that North Africa region, them and their own, probably even Pan Arab, even though we know how the Arabs see them anyways. But that's up to them. Then there's the Sahel region. Then there's uh there's the Horn. There's the Horn region. Then there's the forest region from West Africa, the forest and the coast on the Atlantic front. From west, that's the Gulf of Guinea,
Mhm.
going into Central Africa. That's going to be the biggest economic bloc by virtue of even having the most people. The Niger Congo speakers and the Bantu speakers are the most populous racial groups on the continent. We are more than half the continent. And this is why we get a lot of beef from the Horners and the North Africans, because they don't like the fact that when anybody on the planet thinks of an African, the first type of African that comes to their mind is us. They don't like it. So they're always attacking us over it, you know. And that's all. You remember that incident in Tunisia? I predicted that incident for some of my Horner friends. I was like, with the rhetoric some of you guys run against us, this thing is going to happen. 2 weeks later, it happened. Literally 2 weeks after I told them, it happened. Anyway, so they'll probably have their own region, but hey, you know, and from what I hear a lot of them say, they feel more kinship to people in Yemen. Anyway, so the people in the forest, which is
Mhm.
West Africa, Central Africa, I think they're gonna have their own region, which will be the biggest, and that region is gonna go all the way down south following the Bantu expansion routes, and it's going to incorporate the pygmy groups. The pygmies, they are too small to have their own economic region. I mean, a lot of them are still living almost in the original state they used to, and the ones that have moved into the townships, they are not really in economic power. You know, so I think, and besides, we and the pygmies were genetically linked anyway. The pygmies came before us, so it's just like the Bantus and us.
So I
You
know
know,
Virigi says that's the way I have been thinking. When you speak of Pan African, all of us coming together, and all of us, she means every black person around the world.
this is what I'm saying. It's not quite gonna happen like because see now like there's black people in Papua New Guinea, and many of us don't even know their plight. They are suffering, especially Western Papua New Guinea. They are. Can you imagine? The West has allowed Indonesia to carry out modern day colonization on them. Why? Just so that uh, they can't claim those Papua New Guineans who look like West Africans, even though they are not. There's genetic distance between us and them, but they look like us. So they don't want those guys to claim sovereignty so that they can keep exploiting their gold. Because that Papua New Guinea has the largest deposits of gold in the world. As in, they found a whole mountain there made of gold, silver, and copper. The West, they couldn't believe their eyes. They, if you know how much they poured into mining this mountain, they eventually reduced the whole mountain to nothing. Now they start mining a second one. That's how much gold they have in Papua New Guinea. You know, so and then there's the Australian Aborigines. Those ones, in fact, they've gone extinct. I'm not happy saying this. I mean, I heard a statistic the other time. There's only 1% pure-blooded Australian Aborigines left. 1%, and then when Britain got to Australia, there was 1.5 million of them. Today, there's half of that, less than just over 700,000 left.
So
Uh,
what happened? Did they stop breathing? Did they
did
stop
you hear of
breathing?
their
Sorry, not breathing. Did they
whitening
stop
policy?
breathing?
Did you hear of the whitening policy where they will kidnap their children and adopt to white families who will now marry them off to white children as well? And then the racism, even though many of the Aborigines are now mixed, there are some of them. In fact, I saw a documentary the other day. This guy that looked so white, yeah, but you could still see that there was a bit of shade in there. But he had white, so long, straight hair, nose, everything white. Hmm? But this guy was still crying about racism, how the pure white Australians are racist against him.
Hmm.
So, see, the Australian Aborigines is still an ongoing genocide.
When black people say once when I'm not sure if it's Africans or black people that say that, but there was a fear in the United States at some point, the fear of the domination of black people, people of color,
Mm,
because of interracial marriages.
mm,
Okay, so you've just said this about Aborigines in Australia, and I'm thinking, if that's possible in Australia, it is going to be possible anywhere else.
of course,
Even if, yes. So
of
as
course,
interracial marriages carry on, even though it's the white people who have been afraid of going extinct, the more they mix with people of color, it actually looks like it's more of the black people or the Africans who should be more afraid of the possibility of the extinction of their race.
yeah. Because no matter how much you mix even, there's still a hierarchy of whiteness. There's still a hierarchy, even amongst Eurasians themselves, who by virtue of claiming white supremacy, they are the whites, then the rest of us are black. There's a there's not one white group. There are different white groups, and amongst themselves, they fight for supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'll give you an example of what I'm saying. So, going back to the 1400s, or even going back to the Roman Empire, mm, the white group at the top of that hierarchy of whiteness were the Southern Europeans. So that was the Italians, but that was the Italians, the Romans. Then their Spanish and Portuguese cousins took over that power by the 1400s under Catholicism. Even though the remnants of the Roman Empire controlled authority of Catholicism, but the people that had the muscle to conquer and do everything was Spain and Portugal. So those were Southern Europeans. And these Southern Europeans, even from Roman times, they've been fighting their Northern European neighbors, who they called barbarians. They've been dominating them. So by the end of the 1400s, when after their Germanic northern neighbors had adopted Christianity, quote unquote civilized, according to European standards, civilized, they now started playing the same game the Southern Europeans were playing, the game of conquest, and conquered more. And by virtue of conquering more, became dominant in that hierarchy of whiteness, you know. And this is why they look at, you'll be wondering why are they bombing Russia or fighting Russia? But Russia are white as well. It's because in that hierarchy of whiteness, groups like the Slavs and the Jews are seen as the lowest in that hierarchy of whiteness. So, uh, so in the hierarchy of whiteness, you have the Germanics, the Iberian or Roman speakers, the Greeks. The Germanics includes the Anglo-Saxons, who are the people that took over England and USA, Canada, and Australia. Then you have the Slavs, you have the Anatolians, and then the Arabs, the Turks. And then if you extend it to all the way to Asia, you have the Siberians, Mongolians, Han Chinese. All these are all, even genetically, they are closer to each other than a pygmy and a Khoisan genetically. They're all white people. So
Okay, so Starman, just interestingly, I just want to ask, is it even possible that Pan Africanism will ever be realized after all these many decades?
okay, so this is what I'm saying when I give my breakdown of the different regions I see in the future. So in the future, like I said, there'll be, let me just stick to the African ones. There'll be Sahel region, the forest region, which includes the forests of West Africa, Central Africa, all the way down to South Africa. The we're also, I imagine, by virtue of the culture of Ubuntu, you have that culture runs through from South Africa all the way through the forest of Central Africa to West. That Ubuntu is you see when Europeans talk about their socio-economic, political, judicial system, they will say capitalism, communism. Ubuntu is the African one. It's just that Western economists disrespect Ubuntu, and they don't want to talk about it because they actually know it's superior. So, and if they talk about it, people will begin to see an actual, real contender to capitalism. So that region I envisage being the most powerful. Now, like I said, there's going to be now there's three regions that's by virtue of religion, I think will either be on their own or will find a way of amalgamating. So there's the Horn in the middle, there's the Sahel to the West and Central Africa, and then there's the Swahili coast. Yeah. Those ones, by virtue of Islam, they might try and form one region of their own. Ethiopia, the non-Muslim ones, I think by virtue of being neighbors to the Nilo-Saharans, they will I think eventually the Nilo-Saharans, the Ethiopians, and the Niger Congo Bantu groups in Central Africa will amalgamate into a more massive bloc, while the Muslim parts, you know, who want to stick to that culture, will create their own bloc. And
Obi,
I also think that the forest people bloc, which is what we were, forest people, we in the West and Central Africa, will extend alliance to the Caribbean and certain other countries in the future, possibly places like Papua New Guinea, even. Yeah.
Obi-Wan said something that I find interesting, which is they could have a Pan-African Union of willing countries.
Well,
Willing countries.
okay, okay, so like what we have today, the AU, is fake Pan Africanism. I mean, they don't tackle any real issues. Now, with the rise of self determination, and I keep saying we're in the age of self determination, with the rise of self determination, you're going to start seeing for the first time, new real African countries, not all this nonsense European African countries you see today. You're going to start seeing the first real African countries who the West will try and use their European African countries against, which will force them to rally into alliance. And this is when you begin to see a real organization that's going to
Which
be
is why I was talking about on the African continent, if the eligibility criteria, whatever it
Hmm.
is not allowing or not enabling a lot of African nations qualify to join the BRICS nations.
If anything, I think it's the G7 pressure, backroom pressure that's holding a lot of them back. Because G7 understands what's going to happen with the rise of the BRICS. It's over for them. So because they are already the colonial masters, they're going to try and use all sorts of leverage on these.
Let me read something that was so interesting to know,
Mm,
which is the fact that what could actually change things is Saudi Arabia joining the BRICS. It
that's
says the
it.
inclusion of Saudi Arabia into BRICS could force the European Union to ditch the US dollar and settle the oil and gas trade in the new currency. Therefore, Saudi Arabia joining or accepting the BRICS currency could tilt the global powers from the west to the east.
That's why
So,
when I
in
was talking about Saudi Arabia earlier, I said Saudi Arabia is the most important member applying to join the BRICS because of them undersigning that petrodollar deal. That
hmm,
is why the whole world sells oil primarily and everything else in dollar today. You know,
hmm,
once Saudi Arabia, and I said as well that last month or two they did trade selling oil to China for yuan, bypassing the dollar.
hmm.
See, another problem with the G7 system, how they use it to bully African countries and other countries. So imagine Kenya wants to trade cocoa with Uganda. Yeah,
African nations.
because
Mhm.
one, they have to use the dollar, and by virtue of using the dollar, they have to use that US controlled SWIFT system,
Yes.
meaning that that transaction will go first of all to New York, and then you see how the US is chasing Museveni up and down because of LGBTQ. The US now, this trade between Kenya and Uganda doesn't concern the US. It's just want to exchange cocoa for whatever.
Yeah.
But because all of them are forced to use dollar and they have to use the US SWIFT dollar system, and that SWIFT system, the transaction has to go to New York first. Mm? And then suddenly the US is now looking at the transaction thinking, we don't like Uganda.
Yeah.
They're talking nonsense about LGBTQ. And even though this trade doesn't concern us, they freeze the transaction, seize the money. This is why this alone is why countries, even criminal presidents, they see the benefit of joining BRICS, where nobody can stop your transaction or anything like that.
Yeah. That's the absolute truth. And like someone said, you hear about countries borrowing, 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 and in debt and in debt and in debt. America borrows and borrows and borrows, and they talk about debt that nobody really understands because all they do is print more and more and more dollar currency.
And BRICS, yeah, apart from their basket of commodities trading formula, I also heard them talking about something significant. They were talking about using a system similar to the bond core system that was proposed by, is it Maynard Keynes, during the Bretton Woods conference that led to this dollar being global reserve currency today. Now,
Yeah.
that bond core system, the Americans kicked against it and forced the whole world to go with their global dollar reserve system because they understood the power the global dollar reserve system would have given them and how the bond core system would have restricted them. The Americans understood this. That's why they kicked against it. Now, the bond core system is a system that's designed to ensure that no country can go too much into debt and no other country can use debt too much to control or leverage against another country.
Mm.
We all know debt is slavery. Once you're in debt, in fact, debt, slavery was invented by debt. Long before chattel slavery, even the first slaves, two things were as punishment by the first kings in the first kingdoms and as a means of paying off debt. Those were the first slavery formats in human history. Even before chattel slavery only started when kings now started conquering other kings and then enslaving each other. That's when it started. Otherwise, slavery was a started. It was a civic incident, and it wasn't everywhere in the world. Though, don't let anybody fool you and tell you that they don't know why black people are crying over slavery today. After all humans. This is how they always tell the lie. Listen carefully. All humans throughout human history have always practiced slavery. Is a lie, big fat lie. I've debunked this thing so much. If I got $1 every time I debunked it, I should be stinkingly rich by now. It's a big fat. The history of see everything in this world has an origin point in time and space. There is a history of slavery. There's a history where slavery started, how it spread, and who was doing it and where. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, man, as soon as man looked around, saw the next man, and he had more power, he just grabbed him. No, it's bollocks. Slavery doesn't just happen like that. Certain things need to be in place for slavery to happen. Number one, you have to have kings. Once you have a king, the whole population is already even slaves. Then the
Subject.
bottom of the population, that's where you now get the real, proper, in your face, you are a slave. And tropical Africa did not have a history of kings until the arrival of political Islam in the 1000s. That's when you start seeing the rise of the first kingdoms. People should go and ask themselves why. Ouagadougou, Kingdom of Ouagadougou, Mali, when did that rise? 1000s. Congo, when did that rise? What was going on in that region in the 1200s? Was it not Swahili Coast Arab slave raiding? What forced them to rally to fight something back? Ouagadougou, the history of that one is even clear. Morocco came and destroyed the place looking for gold and salt. And then out of the ashes came Islamic Mali. This arrival of political Islam into the Sahel of Africa was the beginning of the problems of tropical Africans till today. The Europeans just came to make the whole thing worse. So please, you guys don't ever fall for that. Oh, slave. No, you can't blame anybody for slavery. Everybody was doing it. Is a lie. Is a lie. See, I've been asking people for evidence that okay, so if tropical Africans were enslaving each other before Islam came or before the Europeans came, how were they doing it? Was it? I've had some people, some real, these white people that act as if they have all the brain. Maybe they think I'm stupid. They've told me, oh, they probably tied each other with ropes. I'm like, really? Well, you think me or the slave is stupid that you tie him with a rope and he'll just stay there and he won't tie himself and run away? Show me the evidence. Show me chains that can be archaeologically dated back to before the arrival of the Muslims and the Christians from Europe and Arabia. If you can show me those chains, the slave markets, the slave camps, the archaeological evidence, then I'll believe you. And because I know that those people did not have kingdoms before this period, then I know that there is no strong man that would have created a hierarchy where slaves would have been at the top. Sorry, slaves would have been at the bottom and this strong man at the top.
Empirical
And if
fact.
the evidence existed, if the evidence existed of the, say, the chains, remember, tropical Africans were the first people on this planet to smelt iron. So it's not as if they didn't have iron use for iron. They were smelting iron for even before the Bantu expansion happened with iron technology. They already
Mm,
had iron. So if they were expanding and slaving people up, you will see the remnants of these chains everywhere. You will be able to do even chemical tests on it to see that, yeah, this chain is indigenous. It was not brought by Europeans. The isotope is local, you know, but we've not seen a picture, talk less of artifact itself of such. So why should we believe something? You know fully well you can't go and tell white people, you can't go and make a claim to white people with no evidence and they'll take you seriously. So why should they throw a lie at us without giving us evidence and we just believe it? Oh yeah, yeah, it's human nature. People just enslave people. The Australian Aborigines or pygmies, the pig were pygmies, Khoisan people. Those, you know, those Khoisan people, those so-called Bushmen. How could they have enslaved themselves or anybody else for that matter? And it's the same lie with war, that everybody has been fighting war since the dawn of time. No, me, I've studied all this history. I know how warfare and where it started in human history, how it started. Slavery, I know how and where it started. Genocide, yeah.
Going back to the BRICS nations, just so that at least Africans can understand when they're talking about the BRICS, ordinary people can begin to understand and push and encourage their leaders to go for the BRICS. When Russia was already a member of the BRICS nations before the start of the war, when they were cut out of the SWIFT system, would
Mm.
you say that being part of the BRICS have in any way enabled them to sustain their economy?
Well,
Because
uh-huh.
because countries like India, who still have a lot of leaning towards the United States because of the fear of China, even though China is also a member of the BRICS nations,
Mm.
it's a, neither here nor there kind of unsettling relationship.
Mm.
So would you say, because whatever it is that Russia has been able to achieve as members of the BRICS,
Russia is a
being
unique
cut
case.
out of the SWIFT system can
Russia
be
is
used
a unique
as a
case.
yardstick to measure how any other nations joining the BRICS can actually survive and, whatever the tantrums are that the West will throw
I mean,
eventually.
survival in the BRICS is clear for what it is. Is a better option than anything the G7 is selling. But as for Russia, Russia is a unique case in the sense that, remember I said earlier that the Northern Europe, it's just the 1500s alone. They've tried to invade Russia over 20 times. And for most of that history I was talking about, from the 1000s, that they've been enslaving the Slavs in Eastern Europe. For most of that history, Northern Europe has had the supremacy over them until the end of the Second World War, the rise of Stalin. For the first time, when Stalin got the nuclear bomb, for the first time, power equalized between the Slavs and the Germanics. And the
In-
Germanics have never been happy about this. They've never been happy about. This is why they couldn't let the Soviet Union be. Let me tell you something. The West did not. They will make all sorts of claims why the West defeated the Soviet Union. They will say the Soviet Union was corrupt, it was this, it was inefficient, it was that. The only reason the West won that Cold War was because of the dollar, that currency, that dollar. Let me tell you how they won. If the Soviet Union wanted to buy 100 tons of iron ore from you, say you're the president of Nigeria, because dollar was global reserve currency, you were the Soviet Union, you've been cut off from the West's economic structure, you had to go and produce either resources or labor equivalent to however much you are asking for
Mm-hmm.
that 100,000 tons of iron ore for. So the Soviet Union, for everything they traded, they needed to exchange something of real, tangible value.
Value.
But for the West, who controls the dollar, who will clearly know now that all they do is just push a button on the printer, bzz, bzz, colored paper will just be coming out. And this colored paper is the global reserve currency. And they want 100,000 tons of your iron ore. And you're saying your iron ore, since it's dollar that is the reserve currency now, you are saying you want 5 million for your iron ore. You just press the button, bzz, 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 print $5 million. Come on, they were always going to win that Cold War against the Soviet Union. They were always going to win that. They will lie to you. See all their historians, they'll come and tell you all sorts of nonsense, make all sorts of silly excuses. The real reason is the dollar. The Soviet Union was effectively under siege, economic sanction. That's why they won.
Mm.
And like I said, today the BRICS is for the first time creating a new opportunity for anybody that does not want to be trapped and bullied. Because look at France. Is it not France that's now realizing, hold on, I better start cozying up with BRICS. See them trying to come to BRICS meeting now. France, of all people. And I have a weird want for BRICS to even allow France just to divide the West, to drive a, even though I don't like France, but just to drive a wedge between them.
Divide and rule.
Yeah,
Oh, Sinovia Ridley says, I'm supposed to be in Africa, not America. I have always wondered how was my ancestors chosen. And then she goes to say, which is okay, Starman, I'm not sure if you know this, but she's asking, why is Egypt's pyramid or the pyramid in Egypt on the back of the American dollar?
okay, yeah. Before I even say that, I was going to say something. So I was going to round up something. So the West has never been happy since the Slavs equalized power with nukes, which is why even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they won't let Russia join NATO. They won't let Russia join the EU. They were more focused on bringing Russia down. What they really want is to go into Russia and take away those nukes. That's what they really want.
That's it.
And
And
Russia,
finally, the power, everything is over.
yeah,
Can you imagine a world where there's nobody to challenge
the West. It's
the
over for
West?
all of us. It's slavery. And remember, AI and robotics are coming online now. What can you do? 100 years resistance against robots, resistance fighting or guerrilla warfare against robots. That will just be and at this stage, you've heard of self-replicating technologies, 3D printing. That will just be replicating itself, just be printing itself, and you want to go and fight against that? Come on.
Oh, well, Africa has a long way to go. We
So
have a long way to go. Without
and
unity, we cannot achieve anything as a people. That's for sure. And that unity seems to be an illusion. The closer, or a mirage, because the closer you get to it, you feel like you're getting to it, the farther it becomes
see, I
never
think
ending.
we need to stop focusing on African unity because it's a dream. It's not going to happen. You're not going to have wake up one day and all the African countries will unite. Like I said, it's going to be regional. What you're going to have is certain countries in a certain region forming their own union or block, economic bloc. Then another region of Africa, there'll be another one. And like I said, part of why or what's going to keep them doing their own thing is not number one, cultural and primarily religion. And even the fact that these are largely not even all the same people. Just because they're all black doesn't mean they're all the same people. I understand There's a global blackness, and we're all under the same boot. Understand? But our histories are not all the same. You know, the I don't want to be doing Pan Africanism with a black Muslim just because he's an African too. When this same black Muslim would tell me that if he had a job, he would rather employ a Muslim Palestinian over me. Why? Also, why am I going to fool myself? Just because he's black. But he actually loves a Palestinian more than me. Look at what happens in Nigeria. When they kill Palestinian people, what happens to the Christians? They start killing Christians. True or false? Just because they killed some people in Palestine.
That's ignorant. Those are I don't know what to call them.
And
Absolutely
see,
ignorant,
the way I see, and why I'm saying this thing is going to be
ignorant
regional.
fools.
Why I'm saying this thing is going to be regional is because, yes, there's an awakening going on the continent. But when you look at where this awakening is going on, it's largely in the Christian parts. The Muslim parts are still locked in their religion. And remember, this is a religion that
For
there's a
me, it sounds as though religion is even much more of a bigger problem for
yes,
Africans to unite more than anything else.
the
More
Christian part
than
of Africa
anything
will
else.
wake up before the Muslim part. It's as simple as that. The Muslim part they will remain, and Islam is a colonial religion by Arabs. It's not any, there's nothing, if anything, Islam is anti African. It erases, debases African culture. Next thing you start speaking Arabic, praying to an Arabic God, answering an Arabic name, wearing Arabic clothes. Where's the African culture left? Same thing with Christianity. You start answering John, you start praying to Jesus, you start speaking English or French, and wearing suit and tie. When I tell Muslims that you guys, you think you guys don't realize that the same way we were colonized, you guys too were colonized. They don't see it, which is why I said it's the Christian part that's going to wake up first before the Muslim part.
And the waking up is taking too long.
Yes, because see, we black people need to realize on. I've been saying that I gave the breakdown about if black people saw themselves as prisoners of war, they will understand their lives or their position much better. A lot of people don't like to hear it because they think, oh, you're putting us down, you're putting us down. But the reality is, the Pope declared war on you in 1492. That papal bull, that Doctrine Inter Caetera, whatever decree, it was a declaration of war against the black people and pagans. And that war has not ended. And if we understand this, then when I say this, it will make more sense even. As a black person, black people on this planet, were the victims of the greatest ever war in human history. 1,000 years by the Arabs, 600 years by the Europeans. The longest and most brutal ever war in human history. That's one. Two, were the victims of the greatest crimes against humanity. These two crimes against humanity, top five, if not even top three. Trans-Saharan slave trade, transatlantic slave trade. That even at some point were happening at the same time, became business partners. Three, were the victims of the greatest ever social engineering experiment in human history. That's why we're speaking English and we're answering English names, worshipping capitalism and Christianity. It's not our culture. But somebody is forcing us to do this. This is social engineering. The greatest ever, so a whole continent being socially re-engineered. I mean, I've never seen anything else on this scale before.
Yeah, Obi Man says the African Christian can critique a Christianity. The African Muslim cannot critique Islam.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know that.
And then four,
And
four Africans were the victims of the greatest ever wealth transfer in human history. When I say this greatest ever wealth transfer, many of us don't seem to get it. So, wealth transfer, let's start slave trade, all that kidnapping for free labor for 350 years built the West for them. Hmm? After that, after the kidnapping of slavery, it was now stealing resources, colonialism, for another 100 years. After colonialism, it was more stealing of resources and exploiting brain drain, neo-colonialism, still ongoing till today. Stealing the wealth of Africa, transferring it to the West. Is that not wealth transfer? 600 years of wealth transfer. So when you hear that the estimated reparations just for slave trade alone, not even colonialism or neo-colonialism, no, or the one that's still currently going on, no, 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 no. Just for slave trade alone, the estimated reparation from Europe to Africa, estimated $800 trillion. Then, and you begin to understand what I mean by wealth transfer. How do you think they got all the dollars to build all the aircraft carrier, underground system, skyscrapers? Where did that? Remember, Europe by the 1400s, Europe was broke. They spent all their money going to go and fight crusades, which they eventually lost, and the Muslims blocked access to China and India, the Silk Route, that they were getting spices, silk, and
Mhm.
porcelain. They
Yeah.
became and they depleted their resources of and wood and something else they had again. I can't some other strategic resource. They depleted it. So how come they're now the so-called rich, developed world, Western world? Where did the money come from?
Yes. Starman, we have been live for an hour 42 minutes already. So let's start rounding up.
Yeah, I said I was going to talk about nuclear weapons before. And I was talking about a third force. Yeah, there's the G7 force, BRICS, but there's this third force nobody ever talks about or seems to notice.
Mm-hmm.
The third force doesn't seem to know itself. The Africans.
Mm-hmm.
One of our brothers mentioned nuclear weapons, that Africa needs nuclear weapons. I actually disagree. We don't need nuclear weapons to take power. All we need is revolution. Overthrow the prison warders who have been masquerading as our leaders. Once we overthrow them, you see this like Arabs had their Arab Spring. We haven't had a tropical African version. If we want freedom, we need one. If we as tropical Africans want freedom, we need an Arab Spring level. I'm not saying the same exact thing, copycat. No, 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 no. But that sort of revolution, domino effect, country to country to country, cleaning out all the old bullshit. Eh? So until we have that revolution, we're not going anywhere. Now, once we do this, the West, now, and I keep saying that this current generation is in our hands to do this. If we don't do this, our children are slaves forever. And why I'm saying this is because we're living through a time when the West is on a decline. If we do not seize this opportunity and free ourselves, while the West is distracted with Ukraine, China, plus the decline, what's going to happen is as soon as China knocks the West down, China is going to seize Africa because China understands that Africa gave the West her strength. She's not going to just leave Africa because the West is only going to go back, take Africa, and push back down on China. China is just going to, right, the West is down. I've wrestled Africa off her. I have to keep Africa. And we're going to end up in a new colonialism. This is our opportunity. This 10 years from 2020 to 2030 is not only the most dangerous decade in human history, but the greatest opportunity Africans have to free themselves. And when we do this revolution and free ourselves and take over and our sovereignty and actually self-determine ourselves, which means we now control our resources. It's no longer G7, IMF. At this stage, you begin to see those countries. Remember, I said earlier that the West to try and use other countries and other instruments to back them in a corner. They'll begin to now form their own union. And why I was talking about the Ubuntu part of Africa before was because that region, West Central Africa, I actually see forming an Ubuntu union because that's Ubuntu is a socio-political economic system. They are going to form an Ubuntu union, and Ubuntu is not capitalist. So, if anything, they are going to be exchanging resources for mutual benefit, and they won't really need the West. Now, the only options the West will now have will be okay, we're going to sanction you, we're going to sanction you. But hello, didn't you try sanctioning Russia, who actually had all the resources? And how did that backfire on you? What, you think we're stupid? But try, yeah, go on, be our guest, sanction us. We have resources and you want to sanction us. So far, what? Go ahead. That's not going to work. Their second option will be, right, and this is the one people fear a lot. Oh, they're going to nuke us. Nah. They need those resources too much. Remember, their economies are built on resources. If they nuke us, they fuck up the resources too.
Oh, excuse your French again.
Sorry, yeah. So they're not,
Be present.
yeah, they're not going to nuke. If anything, they'll put boots on ground. They'll create some scenario. Oh, something, weapons of mass destruction, some LG. I mean, this they will use LGBTQ, humanitarian. Oh, boots on ground. But
But decimation of the land is something they will not in that magnitude because, of course, it means everybody loses, even
yeah,
they
yeah.
themselves.
So boots on the ground is the only realistic option, which I think will eventually even still backfire because first things first, the men of the West today do not have a fighting stomach. That's number one. Even, so a lot of them are still crazy, though I'm not getting it twisted. So they are like the American army still trains hardened killers, brainwashed hardened killers. So I'm not getting it twisted. But all that needs to happen is number one, they can't outnumber us. If they are coming to come and invade us, they can't outnumber us. All that needs to happen is kill enough of them, make sure there's enough body bags going back home to America.
Who?
No, kill enough of the
Let's
West.
be careful. Let's be careful with the words we choose to use,
No, I'm
please.
talking about should they invade, putting boots on ground,
Yeah.
which is going to involve killing. All we need to do is liquid or nullify enough of them, send them home in body bags, and opinion will change. They'll be like, okay, this shit is sorry, this endeavor is getting too expensive now. So
Yeah.
I believe this is the greatest opportunity we have to free ourselves. But
So I know
enough.
you really has written something that I don't understand. I read it twice, couldn't understand, but maybe you will. Can you
The
see the YouTube comments, Starman?
the is it the Egypt pyramid on the back of the dollar?
That's the question she asked, but she then wrote again. She said, the imaginary God isn't humble. It
Isn't
requires worship. The imaginary God isn't humble. It requires worship and praise from its victims. That's not humility.
yeah,
That's arrogance. It
yeah,
could be classified as a murderous bastard as well,
yeah,
since it always seems to be threatening to burn people who don't believe in it.
yeah, yeah.
Do you
I mean,
understand what
huh?
she means?
Yeah. See, there was a book I read many years ago where one of the early missionaries, I think it was a Scotsman, he came to, I think it was somewhere in Igbo land as well, and he was trying to convert these people. This was before colonialism even kicked into full effect. So I was preaching his Bible to these people, trying to convert them, and the people weren't buying it. And then one of them asked him that, uh, so first of all, one of them was like, "Man, this your God. it seems like, man, the guy is always angry that, and you guys seem to live in fear of him. Why do you need to worship your God and why do you need to worship? Well, yeah, why do you need to worship your God? It seems like you guys live in fear of him. That we don't live in fear of our father, our own God. He's our father. We commune with him. Can you see the difference in religious ideology? One worship their God, another one communes with his God. Which was why the Africans weren't buying it. Why would you give a God you commune with for a God that you have
So
to now live in fear of?
Africans communed with their God,
Yeah,
and the God that the white man or the West brought was a God
worship in fear.
worshipped.
So think about it. Why those Africans weren't buying what that missionary was saying back then? Why would think about it? Why would the Africans give up a God that they just commune with for a God they now have to live in fear of worshiping? So they were even laughing at the guy. Then one
Mm.
of them asked him that why does God need to even write a book? Another one asked him why does he need to have a son? I mean, like they couldn't understand these crazy ideas. Write a book, have a son. Well, because to the Africans, their God was
What was the
was truly
response?
everywhere. Yeah.
What was the response to their question?
Obviously, the guy had no response. He was just writing down uh, the resistance he met. Whilst he was trying to convert these people.
Right.
Yeah. Obviously,
There
what
were,
are you going
so
to
there
say?
were people who were thinking people,
Yeah, of course. We're not.
analytic people.
It's just out of trauma after the violent, bloody conquest, and then the trauma that came for that. Anything they now remember, like I said, prisoners of war. The survivors are traumatized. When the conquerors now say, "Oh yeah, march this way," all of you march. When they say, "Oh yeah, start digging," everybody start digging. You know, that's what happened. They were literally trauma, and we're still in that trauma. Only a handful are beginning to wake up, are beginning to really, and even that waking up is a process.
Other than the fact that, of course, because of the tools and the technique the West using Christianity to oppress and control the Africans they met. Of course, it can be argued that why should, if you revere something that is greater than yourself, for something to be your God, like in my own understanding, you cannot be my God if I perceive you to be an equal, isn't it?
Mm,
You cannot be my God if you are an equal. For you to be a God to me, it means that you're superior, isn't it?
mm,
And if I know you to be superior to me or perceive you to be superior to me, then I can give you worship. However, in the context of what we speak about, we understand why they were deliberate in using some of the terms that they used.
mm.
Because you don't question a power that you worship, isn't it?
Um, I mean, I don't think having a God necessarily means having to be in fear of that God. I
Being
mean,
in worship
respect is
doesn't
one
necessarily mean being
respect is one thing.
being in worship
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean having to acknowledge fear. However, that's how it was concocted for the Africans to perceive this God that the Western people have brought with the Bible.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah,
Because
that's how
so,
that's how
so
that's right.
Africans now, for them, worship and reverencing the God they serve connotes fear, trembling
Yeah,
in the presence of that supreme being,
yeah.
because that's the way they were conditioned to understand this.
But even the Bible is enough to make you live in fear of that God. You know, I mean, we see what he does to, or what he tells his followers to do to people who go against him, the punishment reserved for sinners, all that stuff. That alone. is enough to make you live in fear of him.
That's not true. That's an argument we can have for a different day.
Okay.
Because if we go back to the people who have argued that even the Bible, the text of the Bible, was something that was what's the word, derived from um, African cultures and traditional ways of doing things in Kemet. You know, the people who argue that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then what would be your argument? Because if you try to dissociate and make it look like the God in the Bible, or the scripture in the Bible is has, to be honest, let's not digress, because this is going to a totally different topic.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would be
We
an
can have that talk
interesting
another
thing
time.
to
Yeah.
look at another day.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's, in 3 minutes, round up this broadcast.
Yeah. So, I mean, the future of Africa is in the Africans' hands. We need to wake up a critical mass. And the reason why nothing is really happening is because, yeah, people are waking up, but we've not yet hit critical mass. Now, critical mass doesn't mean all the Africans. All we need is just 5 to 10%. That's critical mass enough. That all you really need for a revolution to happen is 5 to 10% of the people of the population to want that revolution to happen. You know. So unfortunately, we don't control any media that we can use to spread information to ourselves. We have to rely on white media, and you know, a program like this, where you're dropping hardcore truths. We know how algorithms will push such programs down and not allow it to propagate. But we just need to carry on regardless. The fundamental thing for me, the root cause issue or the solution to the root problem is still self-determination across the African continent. All these colonial countries need to be broken up. Obviously, not all of them will break up, but most of them will have to be broken up. There's no need having a country just for the sake of being big if it can't be managed. That's just senseless, pointless. There's no need having a country with I mean, in Nigeria, you have 51 different ethnic groups.
You just took it out of my head. I was just thinking about the nations originally, the way we existed as nations.
Exactly. Yeah,
You know,
that's a recipe for disaster. They will never agree on anything. Never. 51 different people with almost as many different worldviews. And then to show you that Nigeria is a fraud, is propaganda. Almost every Nigerian believes there's 350 different ethnic groups. That's a lie. That's a lie. It's only easy if you add everything up properly. It's 51. Because when you go to pages like Wikipedia, where they actually tell you 371 different ethnic groups, when you look at a lot of those ethnic groups, Ibibio, Ekoi, come on, these are brothers. They're brothers, man. Come on, and the same thing, all same everywhere. They cut all the even Igbos.
yeah. Once the dialect changes a little bit,
Exactly, they call you a
yeah,
different
but
tribe.
they actually, it's just like I always say to people that it took me until 2003 when I realized I was an Ijo girl.
Mm,
Do you understand?
yeah,
It took till 2003. Not my parents told me, nobody told me, and I'm not sure my parents even realized that we were all Ijos,
right.
because there was that demarcation, that thing that they fed into the minds of people of feeling, ethnocentric, feeling superior amongst yourselves just because there's a little bit of a twist in dialects.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, so even as a rivers as a if you go all the way to south, and then you go to the states where they have Ijos, then you have the core Ijo people, you have the Okrikas, the people who originally, the people from Boni originally
yeah,
spoke a language called the Ibani language, and They have the Nembe, they have the, you know, Andoni, So when you look at these things, I was in primary school when I stumbled upon a book that was translating teaching Bonny people their original language because they had been infiltrated, the intermarriages. They now spoke more Igbo, and now they were going back to school to learn their mother tongue, which is Igbani.
mm,
And in that book, I was so shocked to understand Igbani more than I even understood some of the other Ijo dialects, like Nembe and all that.
mm,
It was so similar to my language, which is Calabari. So you
mm.
can imagine how we just shortchanged ourselves, making ourselves so little when we
So
were
small
much more.
things. Yeah, it was
Just
psyop.
tiny things that were so irrelevant, as
Yeah,
opposed to if we were recognized as one. you
exactly.
know, it's just like somebody coming to tell me because somebody spoke Igbo that is Owerri Igbo. I think they have the Igbo that is spoken in
They have
Imo State,
different dialects. Yeah.
a little different from Anambra, and then you say they're different people because they say things a little differently. Anyway, it's been such,
I don't know if I should say one last thing about why self determination is very important.
yeah.
I think the way I say this illustrates it very clearly. So, self determination across Africa is very important because the current model Europeans left us with is a recipe for disaster and genocide and perpetual war. And let me break down what I mean. So, let's say you have two different populations of people, population A and population B, yeah? And
Hmm.
then you take two of them and lock them inside one country, country X, meaning that they will have to share one state apparatus, which means they have to share one presidency, one executive, judiciary, legislature, embassies, ministries, military, army, air force, police, everything. They have to share one economic system, bank. They have to share one state apparatus. These two populations. Now, these two
Oh no, Starman, you're
populations
frozen.
are in two
Okay,
different
go
parts of the
ahead.
country. One
You're
in the
frozen for a bit.
Okay, one in the north or the east, one in the south or the west. Yeah, the two populations and they are different parts of the country, the same one country. And then population A is in a part of the country where there's no resources. B is in the part of the country where there's resources. Now, population A wants access to the resources from the south so that they can build up themselves. What you have in this scenario, where these two different groups are sharing a country, is a perfect recipe for genocide because as population A is now eyeing the resources of population B, all that needs to happen is for population A to get into power, monopolize power, and as we can see, it happens a lot in Africa. Buhari is the latest one that showed us how it can be done. We saw what Buhari did, how only Fulani were in all the positions of significance. All population A needs to do is, since they're eyeing the resources of B, get into power, monopolize it, and then when they now have full control of all state apparatus, the judiciary, executive, legislature, military, banking, embassies, they can now go after population B in that country, start killing them to take their resources. And let me say why I said this is genocide. The best scenario for genocide. As they are killing population B and stealing their resources, it is a genocide because population B has no access to any state resources or apparatus to fight back and defend themselves. Nothing is a genocide. All population B can do, to no effect even, is run to the international community. Hey, guys, they are killing us here. Oh. The international community will look at, oh, sorry, internal affairs, we can't really, and you're left to your own
It's
device.
always internal affairs when the person or the people in power is having their interests.
And then I was even going to get to, so now The situation is even worse. If a foreign interest wants the resources in the land of population B, eh, and then because population A too want it, they want the benefits of it. The foreigners now use A to go and carry out that genocide. That means even when you run to international community, they will look. You see what BBC does. BBC will cut. You guys are the terrorists. They will use their media, that foreign media that wants that resource. They will use that. Oh, you guys. They say you guys are rebels. You can complain all you want. Oh, okay, okay, okay. Let's go to your embassy now. Remember, your embassy is being controlled by population A. Your embassy too will just say, oh, they are just some crazy rebels. It's over for you. They've left you to the lamb. Anything from the population A can do anything they want to you. As far as the world is concerned, you guys are rebels and terrorists.
Which was what happened. An example of it that happened during the NSAS in Nigeria. No one can ever rival the nepotistic tendencies of Buhari, and I do hope nobody. I don't imagine anybody else ever being worse than what Buhari did. However,
Now, a second part to this story is imagine the same population A and population B. You take
yeah,
two of them, put A in country X, put B in country Y. Even if A wants the resources in country Y and they're willing now, so by virtue of being in two different countries, you have two different state apparatus. Each population has their own judiciary, executive, army, embassy, banks, everything. Even if A wants the resources in population B's country, their country Y, and they decide, okay, let's launch tanks, launch planes, jet fighters, everything, you're not going to get a genocide. What you're going to get is a war because population B, they too now have state apparatus that they can use to fight back. And if it's foreign interests that's behind population A, eh, population B too now has an embassy that they can use to lobby other countries and say, hey, hey, guys, they are killing us for our resources. Those resources, we're willing to sell it to you. Give us tanks too. And you will always find someone that will take you up on that offer.
which is
It's
what
not
happened in
a
Syria, isn't
genocide.
it?
Huh?
An example of can be used of Syria.
Right, exactly. It's not going to be a genocide. And this is why self determination is very important in Africa, especially in countries like Nigeria, where you have ethnic groups that have no protection, no sovereignty. Anything can happen to them anytime. Look at the Middle Belt. Do you know how many villages have been displaced from Middle Belt? No protection until each ethnic group in Africa can carve out, can have their own country, not for the sake of having country, but for the sake of having their own sovereignty to protect not just those people, but that culture and the language. You're going to keep having African languages dying every week. There's a Wikipedia page, African countries on the endangered list and the ones that have gone extinct. There are two Wikipedia pages even. One for the ones endangered, going extinct on a weekly basis, African
Hmm.
languages, and the ones that have already gone extinct. All because a lot of these languages are forced into countries where you're either speaking French or English, and when you're not, you'll be so mixed that you have to learn somebody else's language for which is not a bad thing. But like in Nigeria, when an Igbo man has to leave Igbo land as a kid, maybe because his parents took him to Lagos, he grows up in Lagos, now learns Yoruba more than his own Igbo because everybody around him is Yoruba.
But that's the truth. Starman, I understand my language. I might understand so much more than I'm able to speak. However, I cannot have this sort of conversation I'm having with you in my language. I have no words. I don't know what the words are.
And
It's
if your
not
language
something
dies,
that we're proud of. This is just it. And this is how the extinction starts. I
if,
raised in
if your
another
language
generation. I'm here in London. Sometimes my daughter says to me, Mom, how do you say this in Calabari? And I find myself actually thinking. I'm the one saying to her, you must learn my language, you must, da, 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 da." And I speak the ones that I remember all the time to her. But the moment she asks a question and I go, and I just realize, oh my God, can you then imagine what is going to happen to the next generation? I sometimes have to call my
Exactly.
mom
See,
and say, as I call my mom and say, how do you say this? Because I have searched my brain and that information is not there.
yeah.
So you can imagine, it's a shame. It's a shame that it took
See,
this long for us to actually come to this place to understanding.
what we're saying now is very important. Is very critical. See, when a language dies, the culture dies. And language is the very cornerstone of culture. Without a language, you cannot have that whatever unique culture you have there. When that culture dies, the people become identityless, they become lost. They become like you know how throughout history when they enslave people and erase their identity
Yeah.
and they suddenly don't have any orientation anymore. Even when they free them, they don't know where to go. They don't know where home is.
It's like incarcerating someone for so many years. You
Right,
said, have you ever seen a prisoner incarcerated for so long, let them out and they
right.
want to go back into jail
Exactly. It's like
because they don't know how
domesticate
to?
an animal.
Yeah,
When you release that animal, it's not going to go back to the wild. It doesn't know how to hunt anymore.
it's gonna
Doesn't know
come.
how
Gonna
to even crack with the nose anymore. All that is that animal is not can never be a wild animal anymore.
yeah, yeah.
You
Oh, Starman, today I really wanted to give you your time. You see, I wasn't in a hurry,
know.
but still,
I know, I
there
know.
must be an end to the broadcast today so that we can come back, refresh, and pick a different topic and discuss. I deliberately didn't want to invite any other guests. I have a long list of people waiting to come on the show, but I just thought this week I give to Starman.
Well, one more thing I wanted to say for the brother that mentioned nukes. Why I was saying we don't even need nukes.
Yeah.
Once we self-determine and control our resources, at that stage, on self-determination, clearly we don't have an army. We don't have a. It takes 15 years to build up a nuclear program. So there's no way we're just going to get nukes. Yeah. But once we self-determine and control our resources, meaning that we can now say, look, okay, West, we've decided not to sell you any more uranium from Congo, where the best weapons grade uranium comes from. We decided not to sell you anymore. All it's going to take is 12, 13 years. And nobody on this planet will ever threaten anybody anywhere else on this planet ever again with nuclear weapons. Because nuclear weapons actually have a shelf life, about 12 to 15 years or something like that. They actually have
Hmm.
a shelf life where after that they go expire. You can launch them, but you're not guaranteed they will go off.
Hmm. Interesting
Once we
to know.
control our resources for that long, all their nuclear weapons go expire, go out of go expire. They can't threaten us again. And ironically, it's just going to take about that same time for us to develop a nuclear program ourselves. So trying to get nukes shouldn't even be the number one thing. Where you know,
Well, it's not even safe to have. It's just that when you have a bully on the
yeah,
prowl, just all over the place, and you're looking for it, because no country in the first place should even own a nuclear. Um, you know.
yeah, exactly.
Yes, so Starman, let's call
Mm.
it a day. Let me just take quick reads from Sinovia Indigo. I keep calling her the name that I'm used to calling, which is
Mm.
Sinovia. She says, thank you so much for this very informative and intelligent conversation. It's nice when I can listen to people who are serious and who do deep research in order to inform the masses. And Obiman, thank you, Sinovia. Obiman says, how many languages do you guys speak anyway? Obiman, what are you asking me, or are you asking, like, on the continent of Africa, how many languages? That is something that we cannot answer, because even what they have on Google cannot be complete. Yeah,
I think there's an estimated 3,000 languages in Africa.
estimated.
Estimated.
That's the keyword. Estimated. Estimated.
But many of them are similar to each other. Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously, we know the language groups: Niger Congo, Bantu, Chadic, well, Afro-Asiatic, Chadic, all of them, Nilo-Saharan. Yeah, we know the languages. Yeah, the click ones, the Khoisan, the
Those
pygmy
ones are
ones. The pygmy
the
ones have largely gone extinct because they
you
adopted Bantu
see,
languages. But yeah, huh?
the interesting thing is the click ones are the ones you can never learn as an adult. I don't think you must learn as a child. You can never. I tried doing that. Say something, and I'm like, no. It's either I do the click first, and you're trying to say it, but how they do that, say make the sounds.
Yeah, you can't make them together.
Oh no, oh no. That's uniquely theirs. Oh, Starman, thank you so much. So we should be coming back here again, doing other topics. We'll just see what the coming weeks will be like. Um, and we'll be back here. You know, Starman is always very interesting because you're the only one who is able to come here and give a little. You're the way you analyze the African situation and topics basically is always so different because you give empirical facts, which is what I like. You might not be the greatest orator, but you do your research. So we have to be patient with Starman because before Starman to say one thing, we have to be patient. We just have to listen because it's going somewhere, which is the reason why anything we're coming up with Starman, nobody else must be here. Okay? So that we can get somewhere. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Starman.
thank you for having me. And
Yes.
I always enjoy our broadcasts. And yeah, for me, it's an opportunity to try and spread a lot of information that I know many Africans don't have access to. Hopefully the ones that see this will spread the same information and hopefully we'll get that critical mass we actually need. But people need to be active. One person can't do it alone. 20 people can't. We need like a domino effect. People need to take it seriously, be actively on it as well, and on their own do research. Everything I've said here today,
Mhm.
if play it back, be googling the things I'm saying to see for yourself.
Yeah,
You know,
that's what we do here.
right?
You raise the consciousness, you open the minds of the persons or the people listening. That you're trusting that they will take one thing and do a research on it and have deeper understanding or clarity to the issues. Because a lot of people in Africa, even in the diaspora, don't even understand what when people are talking about BRICS nations. They don't know. All they know, if they know too much, is yeah, the BRICS nations are, but they don't know what the pros and cons or the advantages and disadvantages of or the difference the BRICS nations can make to
Yeah,
the status quo
yeah.
as it currently is. Yeah. All right, Starman. I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to you today. I have learned so much as well. So I'll catch you on the other side as always.
Okay. Thank you, and take care to all the people in the audience as well. See you next
Thank
time.
you.
Bye.
All right, so that was Starman Alpha. As always, he is family here on Africa Rice TV. My go-to person, any day, anytime. And thank you, Synovia Reedy, Obi Man, and everyone else who joined us from Facebook and YouTube and sent in questions, comments, and contributions, of course. Um, that's about it for today. If you haven't liked, followed, or subscribed to our channels, please do so. It's Africa Rice TV on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Okay, press the notification bell so that you are notified once we come on live. And that's about it. We love you and see you next time. Remain African in your mind. Be thinking on a daily basis African because honestly, this is the only way we will finally get ourselves to the place where the next generation will be proud to call themselves African and be African and eat African and show African, everything African. All right, until next time, have a good evening and God bless you. Bye bye.